Welcome to Unpromoted Episode 2. This week we sat down with Stelios, a close personal friend of mine and someone who initially taught me how to be a sales development rep, as he talks through his journey from SDR all the way through to account executive. This conversation lasted twice as long as I thought it would, and so we broke it up into 2 episodes. Part 1 goes through his career as an SDR, and he talks about the skills he learned, the things he struggled with, and how we can learn from his mistakes. Hey, Stel, how's it going?
Oh, I'm very well, thanks. That's too funny. Sorry, I was distracted by the really cool countdown that it gave me.
Yeah, we're trying out some new recording stuff, and they all have some pretty cool countdown features.
No, this looks like a great platform. I like it a lot.
Thanks, man. Again, thanks for coming on. I know we planned this probably about 3 weeks ago. Had some trouble nailing down a time, but I appreciate you taking, a Saturday afternoon to sit down and talk about joys of being a sales development rep.
Yeah, great. I mean, those times are a little bit behind me now, but the trauma is still fresh.
Yeah, you've been out of the role for what, 6 months now? 8 months?
Oh, yeah. It would have been around July 2020. So I couldn't give you an exact date, but somewhere in there. So we're getting there.
No, I remember we went out for dinner shortly after you got promoted as like a celebratory dinner.
Yeah, I've been known to celebrate.
Cool. We'll dive right into it, man. I know I prepared a list of questions for you. We might go a little bit off script. No harm there. But we'll start off simple, man. Tell us your story from the beginning, how you got into B2B sales development and all the way to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, if we want to start off by, how I really got into sales, this was something that I brought up in my initial interview with the business development director that decided to bring me on. So, one of the examples that I used as, that if I were to think of maybe like a milestone that really got me into sales, it would have been, during my undergraduate studies. I decided to pick up a serving and bartending job, and within those roles, whether you're serving, whether you're bartending, you have these different alcohol sales reps that will come in and incentivize you to sell their products over others, and during those days you'd be incentivized to sell whether it was like a Heineken product or a Canadian or whatever the rep was promoting at the time. And then those would be the incentives for you to go out and pitch their products essentially over others. And I'd say that was probably my introduction into sales, because I absolutely loved it, right? Having a very clear objective when you walked up to a table for the first time, like, you know what? My intention or my objective is going to be to sell, this table a round of Heineken over Canadian or whatever product they were pushing. So getting in there with a clear objective, I think that was probably my first, run-in with a sales, with the sales environment.
I never thought about being a server in that way. Like the idea of selling one brand over another, like I thought they just hit you with the specials and sort of let you do your own thing.
Yeah. Again, it's really hard to say, right? So, different places, had different incentives. But when I was working there was a short time where I worked for MLSE, so Maple Leaf Sport Entertainment, and I worked at one of their restaurants. And it was so much fun. We used to do, again, different promotions for different things, and we used to have some great competitions. I remember there was, one of my most memorable was they were promoting, they were called schooners. I think they were 32-ounce beers in these like cool jugs. And whoever could sell the most schooners between, I think it was, which was essentially an upsell at the time, whoever could sell the most schooners in like the month of June, and this would have been back in like maybe 2013, 2014, you got like 4 tickets to Escapade and like their VIP Heineken section. So made sure to win that, which was awesome. And, still remember that to this day.
That's really awesome. And what about like, you're in the bar industry. I know we worked retail for a little bit together. We can skip over that. But like, what made you decide that business development was, a career you wanted to pursue, or sales development was a career you wanted to pursue? Because I remember when you were being interviewed, like we were working together when you were being interviewed to get your first sales development job. Like, what made you choose to make the jump?
So it wasn't really a jump per se. I had a close friend of mine that worked in the bar industry who, back in the day I was pretty competitive with, in whether it was sales competitions, him and I, who and I still work together today. We were just very good with people, very outgoing. We were extroverts. And he reached out to me one day and said, "Hey, I found this job with a startup company. I think you'd be really good for it. You should definitely come in and have an interview." And then, at the time, I wasn't crazy about what I was doing at the time. One of the topics that really kind of stood out to me during my education was corporate social responsibility. So when I learned that there was an option, not that I had any idea what this software startup did, but when when I was going from one environment to another, I was thinking, wow, if I can combine working in sales, which I was very good at, and then moving over to a job where I could genuinely help people with some CSR initiatives, I thought it was a match made in heaven, and there was no way I could turn down the interview. And I guess that's kind of where the story starts, if that makes sense.
And that's a really cool story. It's really interesting to see, how you evaluated the choice to jump into a sales development role. Maybe you can answer this in a better way than I could, but when you accepted the role, made the decision to jump, like, did you have any idea what to expect?
It's so funny that you say that. I had no idea what to expect, but and so when I do something, I make sure I play to win. And I remember, talking to my colleague and, asking him questions like, okay, like what does the interviewer want to hear? And I didn't even know what I was really interviewing for. I just knew that I'd be good for it. He's like, look, we're reaching out to businesses. We're setting up meetings to pitch our product. And I'm like, okay, perfect. So I'm like, what does the hiring manager want to hear? And he essentially gave me, a kind of a cheat sheet of, okay, they're going to ask you this, and this is how you should answer. So him and I went out for drinks. We made sure to study, and he gave me the pointers, and I went in and rocked the interview, which is again hilarious because I had no idea what I was getting into.
I had no idea either. Like, I remember, like, the offer letter came in, and at the time, like I said, I was working retail, was like done with retail, ready to jump onto something new. Had no idea what was going on. In the interview, I knew it was a couple, like they said, cold calling is important. And that was about it. Like, and then just signed it, put my notice in, came in with a fresh set of eyes, and had absolutely no idea what to expect.
We were very lucky too because it was such a warm and welcoming environment. The environment that we walked into, working alongside each other in what we called our BD pit or the SDR pit, we had that that great environment. Everyone was welcoming. Everybody kind of knew each other. Ottawa is it's a kind of a big little town where everyone knew at least one other person, which brought them in, and we all wanted to make sure each other was successful. The way that they had the things like territories and revenue bands divided was that you couldn't really step on anyone else's toes, which was awesome because that made everybody want to help each other respectfully, with their own respective territory or revenue band or whatever you want to call it.
And I mean, to add on, obviously it was a welcoming environment. The other part of that was the training that had been developed. Like, I don't think you could have thrown us into a better training program or a more supportive training program. Like, there is a good chance that is part of the reason that, part of the reason I succeeded, but part of the reason you succeeded too.
Oh, absolutely. And you don't realize, especially when you're working for, whether as an SDR or an AE and you're joining a new organization, it's important for everyone to understand that, the learning curve, especially, if you're going into an AE role or an SDR role with a very simple product that's very transactional and, high volume and transactional, it's a lot easier to make mistakes, and they're usually a lot easier to learn, right? Whereas if you're jumping into a role that is, higher complexity, longer sales cycle, higher price tag, there's usually complex sales cycles are usually accompanied by, complex products and complex niches. So it's very important to understand, to know what you know and to know what you don't know, and then to be able to lean on your peers to help them, or for them to help you, and know when to ask for help.
Yeah, that support system is huge, especially when you're in an entry level. A lot of the time, you're cold calling guys that have been in the industry for 20, 30, 40 years and talking to them about the issues they're having. It's pretty easy to get overwhelmed, especially when you're in those first couple months and you're just in that learning curve of, okay, what does the product do? What does the prospect do? How do those come together? What problems do we even solve? And, you're still having these conversations, but having that support system and the pit that we had was huge. Like you could get help so quickly, and the next time you get asked the same question, it's not a problem.
Well, it's funny, just to jump in there, you just said something really funny where, you're talking to someone that's been in a role for, 25, 30 years. And I remember thinking, when I first joined in and, I was cold calling VPs or cold calling directors on essentially an industry that I knew, very little about at the time. It was funny but terrifying when, you'd reach out to a prospect that was like a VP of, whatever industry you're dealing with, and you see that they've been in their role with their company for longer than you've been alive. And you want to call them and explain to them how they're doing something inefficiently or how they could improve their program. I don't know. I found there's something like really funny about that. And I don't know, maybe you agree, maybe you don't, but there's nothing worse than when you talk to someone that just is unwilling to change their ways or is unwilling to explore something. I think there's nothing more disheartening than that.
You're right, especially when their career is older than you. That's a tough pill to swallow. We'll switch gears a little bit. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and I don't actually think we've talked about this off the record in any way at all, but as you're progressing through the sales development role, like what do you think you struggled with the most?
So, depending on on what stage, I think very early on, I struggled with really the basics. When I say the basics, what I mean is, when I was jumping on the calls, I wanted to make sure that I had a very clear objective, and that's really what helped me. So what I found was when I was first starting, one of my biggest struggles were, where am I trying to take a conversation, right? Like what is the objective of my phone call? So as an SDR or a BDR, your role is to get somebody on a phone, somebody with authority in the correct industry, onto a meeting with a senior colleague, okay? But what I found with others that were struggling with that role was that they weren't focusing on the objective. So the objective really needs to be like getting that meeting, right? So if you were to like write out a list of not a list, but if you were to write out, where I am now and where I need to go, it's like if you were to say A is, hey, how's it going? And then Z is, we're booking a meeting. So it's like, how do you get from A to Z properly with that objective? Because I find that, again, people that are not as successful, or my peers that were not as successful, would always lose sight of that. They would call and say, looking to educate you, look, we're calling for, XYZ. But that's not what you're doing. The point is to book that meeting. Now, there's great ways that you can get to from A to Z, whether it's educational content or, a friendly touch point or a webinar or, some sort of marketing collateral. But the objective isn't the marketing collateral. The objective is not education. The objective is booking that meeting. So again, something that I struggled with at the beginning, but I was very easy. I was in a great environment where I was able to learn from others around me. So I immediately gravitated to the people that were successful, and I would essentially dissect what they were doing and say, okay, well, this you're going from, like, this is their objective and this is how they're getting there. let me do my best to replicate it, put my own spin on it. Of course you want to make sure it's genuine, right? Like the point of these calls is to genuinely help people. So as long as you keep that in mind, and you remember that your objective is to get here, then that's what I struggled with the most, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it was probably the same for me. Once you talk about, like, at first you're learning about the product, and as you're starting a call, like, it's so easy to go down that, like, trying to sell them on the product route, even though you have no idea how to do it. And you were the one that taught me. So it was one of those things where you and I are sitting beside each other, and you literally walked into the office and you're like, it's about selling the time, not the product. And that was it. Like, that was the piece of advice that I think was a game changer for probably most of the people that were on our team. Is like, once you make that mindset to, you can have product conversations, just like your goal is to get time.
Right? It changes your whole perspective. And again, it really puts that objective in place. And once you know what you're chasing after, it's a lot easier to get there.
Yeah. Once you have an end goal in mind, like, you hear this all the time with goal setting too. Like, set a goal. I'm going to get healthy. Like, great. How will you know your health? Like, what is the end goal? Like, you need a measurable, I've hit success point. And that was, getting time on the calendar. And that's the end goal you have to keep in mind when you get on the call.
Right. And that's super important.
And okay, so that's one of the things that you struggle with in the beginning. One of the things that I think we all struggle with in the beginning. What about, like, right out of the gate, what was, the thing that made you successful?
So you're going to laugh. And I don't think I've really talked about this with anybody, but probably, obviously my managers knew this at the time, but I struggled pretty hard at the beginning. I'd say within my first 3 months, like, I didn't even know if it was going to work out. I wasn't hitting my targets. I didn't really understand what to do. And what I did, which made me successful, was, again, maybe I'll take a step back here, but what I did originally was I was watching the people that were successful, and then I was trying to figure out why I wasn't. One of the largest gaps that I immediately identified was when, especially when you're pitching on the phone, or you're trying to hit them with a very, very quick, concise, and, a sharp pitch. Those that were successful just had it down perfectly. It was automatic. And I find mine at the time was still very disjunct. It didn't really flow. It didn't sound really sharp, and I didn't sound really competent. So what I would identify as like a TSN turning point was, once I identified this, what I did was I had my script, or, had my talking points, and I would use my commute to work and my commute home to just sharpen my introductory pitch. So I made it automatic, and I would record myself. So I would just go through it and see, what is my prospect hearing on the phone? What I know what I think I sound like, but what do I actually sound like? So then I could change my pitch, I could change my inflections, I could, make my own tweaks. And once I did something that I liked, once I mastered it to something that, which made me successful, I would just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until it was automatic. I took that time. Oh, I was gonna say, so yeah, I just did that on my commute home. So I probably looked like a crazy person if you had driven by me on the freeway, but I would just talk to myself and just practice those pitches.
I don't know if you remember, like, some of the training sessions that we went through when we were going through the learning process, but I remember, like, one of the managers would always be like, you should be reciting this in the shower. Like, that was like, you should have this so memorized that you could repeat it to yourself in the shower. And me being, like, fresh, new, was like, okay. And so
you're like, I'm young, I'm malleable, so, I'll listen to what you say.
Like, at the time, we're in this 1-bedroom apartment, like, my partner and I, and she can hear me, and she thought I was singing in the shower. And so I get out and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm reading my pitch." And she's like, "What?" Just like, "What are you talking about? You sound like an idiot." And I was like, no. Like, I'm reading my pitch. My manager told me that I should have it memorized so that I can say it in the shower. And like, I took that so literally, but like what you're saying, and that same story is the same thing, like practice. Like, you got to practice. You got to know what you're going to say. I'll give you a quote because I think everybody in the sales world seems to know it or has heard it, but it's like, the best practice on purpose, the rest practice on prospects.
Oh, I've never heard that before, but that is sharp.
I stole that from other podcasts and webinars, so I'm by no means going to take credit for that statement. But it's so true. Like, you hear the guys, and like, we can all listen to each other's calls, and we did a lot just to see, like, especially who was booking the most. Like, you're listening to all their bookings, trying to figure out what's going on. But you can tell who puts in the work when no one's looking.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree with you more. And, I would say that, that is true no matter what role you're in, right? Whether you're an account executive, whether you're, an SDR, you really see the difference between those that are putting in the work on their own time. And, Jeb Blount talks a lot about this in his books. And, I think that would be another pivotal moment was when I read Fanatical Prospecting. I remember just when I talked to you for the first time about joining, I'm like, you need to read this book. I'm like, this really is the BDR or SDR sales Bible. I'm like, once you understand what is in this book, you will be successful. And, he really breaks down, what he calls his platinum hours and golden hours. And it makes so much sense. There's so many things that you can be doing, during your 9 to 5, and what can you be doing outside of your 9 to 5. So things that you can do during your 9 to 5 is, reaching out to prospects, because you can't reach out to your prospects at 9 p.m. at night. It just doesn't make sense. But they're not going to be at their desks. They're not going to be at their offices. Hey, now it's work from home. So now maybe you can, but, realistically, yeah, exactly. But, what you want to be doing is taking that, your downtime, the time that your prospects are not going to be in office, and you want to be doing all of the back end work. So you want to be, loading up your Salesforce, looking at Zoom. You want to be, loading up your Outreach, your SalesLoft, or, whatever platform you're using. You want to be using that time for that. And then during the day, you want to be, hammering the phones, hammering emails, reaching out to anything that's live. So he breaks that down to golden hours during the day and platinum hours at night.
Yeah, that's huge. I read it in my first couple of months, and then I turned into Mr. Propaganda for that book and just handed it to everybody who would hear me out. So, I can't recommend it enough. If you're starting in an SDR career, you have to read that book. Like, it is a foundational piece. It's like prospecting 101, basically.
Yeah, not that I'm sponsored by Jeb Blount by any means. But his books are...
Nor Outreach or SalesLoft or Salesforce. No one sponsors us. We'll just have to blank out all of those.
Probably not. I think they're pretty industry standard. You should be fine. But one thing about Jeb Blount, I find his books are they're very practical. And there's like theory mixed with practice every single time. And, those practical examples are what really hit home, right? Like, you can read so many sales books about persuasion or negotiation, but most of it's theoretical, where when, someone like Jeb Blount will give you those real life examples, and talking about, again, how to time block, things like that. And very practical examples. Those are the differentiators that make you, go from good to great.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of our Stelios interview. If you like this episode, subscribe to our page on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and check out next week as we explore part 2,